I Kiss Dating Goodbye was the definitive guide to godly relationships in the Christian community in the late 90s and early 2000. The book was a worldwide phenomenon and outlined an alternative path to secular dating and focused on biblical principles of courtship and godly relationships. Author Joshua Harris became an instant celebrity in the Christian community, and today he is joining me to talk about why he said goodbye to I Kiss Dating Goodbye. Josh, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, Davey, good to be with you, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah. I am so excited to talk to you about this stuff. I'm a little bit starstruck right now, honestly,
Oh, gosh.
because you had such a profound impact in my life growing up in the Shiny Happy People cult, which I'm sure you're all too familiar with. I mean, your book was just so popular.
So
In that,
you were a Gothard family?
I was, dude.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Even
Yeah.
went to their compounds. I spent a week in solitary confinement because I was part of one of their rehab programs.
Oh
It
my
was a whole thing,
gosh.
dude. Yeah. And interestingly enough, the whole reason I went to the compound and ended up getting, put in the prayer room, which is what they called solitary confinement, was because my parents had found out that I had a girlfriend.
Oh, wow. Yeah, cardinal sin there.
Oh, dude. I mean, obviously, that's just going to lead down a path of immorality and probably premarital sex. And, just ultimately you're on the path to hell at that point. As soon as you get a girlfriend, you are on the path to hell.
That is exactly the mindset.
Yeah. So actually, Josh, you kind of ruined my life a little bit with your book. Because I mean that my parents were in love with I Kiss
Oh
Dating
my
Goodbye. And
gosh.
actually I was a huge fan too. I had your book on my bookshelves in my room for years.
Well, the crazy thing, first of all, I'm sorry that it ruined your life. Whatever contribution I made to you being a talented comic, I would love to take some credit for your great sense of humor now. But the funny thing is like people that are not from this world wouldn't understand this. But like, my book, I Kiss Dating Goodbye, people just laugh at because it's like seems like a crazy idea. But in that world, it was actually the more progressive kind of open stance when it came to relationships compared to like the Gothard approach or other people who were more conservative.
Very
So
much so.
that's just how nutty it all is, that I Kiss Dating Goodbye was actually like, this sort of liberal approach to relationships in certain circles. So it's
Yeah, I
nuts.
mean, it was kind of edgy. You're right. Because dude, there was I don't know if it's like a passage or an anecdote in the book where you were talking about how you and your girlfriend would lay in a hammock together,
Oh,
like kind
okay.
of,
Okay. No, that was my second book with my now ex-wife. So
yeah,
you're
the
okay.
boy
Yeah.
meets girl, right? Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
I remember reading that, dude, and I was like, I would never be allowed to do that, but it sounds kind of
Oh, yeah.
hot. So it
Yeah.
sounded really hot.
Well, I tell you, I mean, you grow up in evangelical Christianity or very cultish Christianity, and it definitely, messes with your sex drive. It makes a lot of things hot, you know? Like, that's the
Absolutely.
thing that people don't completely get. It's messed up in many ways, but it definitely makes everything off limits, everything's hot.
Something as simple as playing footsie can just be, I mean, a
Exactly.
whole gateway situation.
Oh my gosh, completely. Yeah, you don't it doesn't take much to have a kink when you grow up in that, environment. People are like,
You're
"What's your kink?
you're so
Boobs?
right.
Boobs? Just boobs."
Just regular boobs. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
just
can't
there
get
you
enough of
go.
them, honestly. Yeah. Well, because
Oh,
everything becomes taboo in that
right.
kind of purity culture.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't worried about, peeing on people at all. It was just like, I just want to get a
Exact
handful of something,
Oh my gosh. No, it's so true. It's the yeah, I mean, that's like a general principle, isn't it? Like, if it's forbidden
Mhm.
and off limits, it seems more enticing and exciting, and when literally everything is off limits, then yeah.
It's all just that forbidden fruit mentality. Yeah.
Yeah. We're laughing about it now, but the reality is in that context, that came with incredible guilt and shame. it didn't feel hot. You just felt terrible about yourself.
Oh, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, you had to swear off and make promises to God that you were never gonna pleasure yourself again to the Sears catalog. It was just this whole guilt complex that we developed,
Oh my goodness.
in adolescent, just experimenting and doing things any normal hormonal
Completely,
teenager
yeah,
would do.
completely normal human things were, yeah, were
Yeah.
viewed with so much, yeah.
It was a weird way to grow up. And kind of looking back on it, I was talking to, some of my other cult friends about this, and the question always comes up like, is that why we have such a hard time with relationships now? Because it was so repressive back then. I
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know. I've seen some people that have gone on to have very successful relationships with people they met while they were still in this kind of fundamental or cult like environment. But it seems like more often than not, you've got
Mhm.
people like me who just cannot seem to get it together in their love life. I mean, I'm just horrible at this stuff, man.
Are you really?
Oh, dude, awful,
In what
awful.
way? In what way that you run from commitment, or you just what's it look like?
I don't think I would ever want to admit on a podcast that people are going to see that I'm afraid of commitment, because that just seems like it's really going to hurt my chances out there in the dating pool.
Okay.
I
Edit this
think
part out.
let's not advertise that necessarily, but yeah, I mean, there is an element of it to that. I think it's just growing up sheltered
Yeah,
from the world in general, but especially from the opposite sex.
yeah,
It's just kind of like, I mean, dude, once I got out of the cult when I was 18, I just couldn't. I went girl crazy.
for
It
sure,
was like I
yeah,
couldn't get enough of it. It was like, oh my god,
right, yeah.
like you said, I just love boobs. This is amazing. I can go to a beach and see bikinis. I can go to a club and they're doing a twerk contest, and I'm just in outer space at that point. Uh, but yeah, I think, maybe some of that had to do with it, just having this insatiable appetite when I was in my, late teens, early 20s.
For
And
sure,
maybe some of
yeah.
that carried over, and maybe some of it was related to the alcohol and substance abuse as well. I feel like I'm probably better at it now. My excuse now is like, I'm so busy trying to build a comedy career. I just don't have time for a relationship. It's not
No, I get it.
necessarily a commitment
Mhm,
problem. It's just a
mhm.
time problem.
It's a time it's a time issue.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I can relate to that. I mean, I there just so many decisions are made for you. I mean, I wrote this book and ended up pushing a bunch of, extra rules on people to be kind of transferring all my baggage onto other people, but I believed it with all my heart, and I had this long, long list of rules and guidelines, and it's almost like there are these muscles that you've never used because the rules are telling you what to do. So you're not really making as many decisions,
Right.
you
You
know?
don't have to think for yourself because you've
Yeah,
already got a rule telling
exactly.
you what to
Yeah,
do. Yeah.
exactly. And so, then you have the opportunity to just go hog wild like you did when you're, your late teens or whatever. And so
Yeah.
there's like it's like this coming back into some kind of balance, but it's hard when you didn't, get that opportunity.
Yeah,
So
you're exactly right. It become, like you said, it's an overindulgence. I don't know about the phrase "hog wild" because that implies the women I was experimenting with were hogs. So we probably want to be careful there. Oh, you wrote this book in 1997 is when it got published, right?
yeah, I think it was, yeah, 97.
And
Mhm.
how old were you when you were writing this? I mean, it really was the definitive guide to courtship back then.
Yeah, it was, I guess I was like, 19, 20,
Okay.
somewhere around there was when I was writing the book, and I think it was published when I was 21. So,
Wow.
I mean, people that don't understand this world, like, there my book was sort of like it popularized ideas that had been in the homeschool community about courtship. You had this whole generation of parents who, grew up, like, in the wild days of the '60s.
Free love, baby.
Yeah, free love. So they were
Uh-huh.
reacting to that like, "Oh, I don't want my kids to make all those same mistakes." At least my parents, they got caught up in the Jesus movement, and
Mhm.
there was a lot of emphasis on protecting your kids from the world. So homeschooling was like, "Let's bring our kids home. Don't let the public schools educate them, and then all these homeschool kids are now becoming teenagers, and the hormones are kicking in, and parents are like, "Wait a minute,
What do we
we're
do
not
now?
yeah, we're not gonna send them out to the dating, world and let them screw up in all the ways we did," and so on. So courtship was like this way of bringing that into the home and into community, and I rebelled against those ideas as a young teen, but
Did
then
you really?
I did, yeah, because my parents were, trying to get me to read Elizabeth Elliot's book, Passion and Purity,
Oh my God, I
and
forgot about
do
that
you
one
remember
too.
that one? Yeah,
Yes, her husband was the missionary that got
got
killed,
martyred.
right?
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So she was like a living saint kind of, and that book was the story of their relationship and submitting your love life to God and all those kinds of things. And I was just like, "Man, I wanna have a girlfriend," and so in my little church youth group, I had a girlfriend for a couple years. I was, dry humping my life away basically, and, and hiding all this stuff, like, my parents didn't know about all this stuff. Well, eventually, I had a come to Jesus moment, where I was like, "I wanna be serious with God," and that relationship symbolized for me, like, this area of my life that I wasn't obeying God in.
Mm.
And so I broke up with this girl, and I felt so much guilt about the things we'd done, and we hadn't even had sex, but I felt so guilty about it.
It was Christian third base probably,
Oh
right?
my gosh, yeah,
Little
exactly.
tongue little tongue action. Yeah,
So
that's
so all this guilt, and then I came back around to everything my parents had been trying to get me to convince me of. I read Elizabeth Elliot's book. I started engaging in this conversation about courtship that all these homeschool kids were having, and I Kiss Dating Goodbye was me sort of simplifying and making it a little bit more young and hip, and here's a young teenager who is writing about this and actually advocating for this, and I, took all those ideas and packaged it in a way that a lot of other, people my age were willing to listen to.
and I mean, the cover of the book, Josh, that slick fedora, I mean, that I don't know how you could I don't know how you could see that fedora and not be like, "I gotta do what this guy's doing," you
I
know?
mean, well, first of all, that wasn't me on the cover, but yeah, that dude looked pretty cool, I have to admit,
Wait, that
yeah.
wasn't you?
No, that was just a photo that the, publisher found somewhere.
No, this whole time I thought that was the Josh Harris rocking the slickest fedora I've ever seen, and the jawline on that guy. I mean, honestly, that probably created some problems
I
for
probably
a lot of
shouldn't have
young
I
women.
probably shouldn't have admitted this, actually. I should just go with, "Yeah, that's me, of course it's me."
Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah,
definitely me.
that jawline.
I mean,
Uh,
it's impressive, and there's nothing that a good Christian homeschooler loves more as far as fashion accessories than a fedora.
it definitely is the nerdy kids version of cool for sure.
Absolutely, dude.
Oh,
So you published this book. I mean, it was an instant success.
yeah,
To me, it was everyone I knew in the homeschool community was talking about I Kiss Dating Goodbye. And when it was published, I was 14, maybe 15 at the
mm,
time. I think that's when I first read the book was when I was
okay,
14 or 15 years old.
yeah,
And when I first read the book, I was like, this is great. Absolutely. I was all bought in. And I
wow,
think a lot of people, bought into that mentality
mhm,
because, like on its face, it seems like a pretty good approach to relationships, especially if you want to maintain purity, but do it in maybe more of like a little bit of a modernized way. Like
mm,
your version of courtship wasn't the Christian arranged marriage
right.
that the shiny happy people cult was advocating for.
Yeah, yeah, the shiny happy people cult would have viewed me as being a little bit licentious because I was saying you could have these friendships and those types of things, but for everybody else, it was, sharing my commitment not to kiss before I got married from that point forward, and only, having a relationship if you were ready for marriage, that kind of idea, um, but the thing about it is, like, I think that uh, all those homeschoolers took the book into their youth groups. Pastors who wanted to, protect their kids from premarital sex. There was such an emphasis on that. There were like
Mhm.
political layers to it. There was a obviously the push against abortion was a huge part of it. You know, push back against the culture that was advocating for, sexual liberation, all those types of things. So it's sort of just perfectly aligned. And and I think there's something, I mean, the reality is that dating kind of sucks in all
Yeah.
generations. You know what I'm saying?
It
Like,
really that's the
besides
thing. We're just looking for something to make this clusterfuck a success,
exactly.
right?
So
Dating is awful, just
it's
end to end,
really
pretty much.
it can really suck, and so anybody
Yeah.
that comes up and says, "Hey, this kinda sucks," there's gonna be a group of people who are like, "Yeah, it really kinda
You know
does."
what? He's right about that. It does kinda suck. Does this work better?
Well, it does, and then there's no, like, confidence like a 21-year-old who's not been in many relationships. I mean, that's, like, the perfect form of, "I know what I'm talking about." You just so I'm writing as if I've got this, like, revelation from God, and because, it's backed up with a few things my parents and these other books have told me, I'm just writing with total confidence of this is the best way to do it.
Well, and you did have that relationship experience, which is kind of unfair. The fact that you had, gotten to taste that forbidden fruit and then tell the rest of us, "Hey, listen, as a guy who's been to Christian third base, don't do it, y'all. Save that first ki You're
I
gonna
I've
wanna save that first kiss."
co I've come back from Christian third base, and I'm here to tell you, you shouldn't do it.
Trust me, it is so hot and so tempting, you don't
Oh
wanna
my
go there.
gosh. Yeah. No, that is, I agree, that is totally unfair, and there are people who are, understandably pissed off at me about that to this day. So I get that. I can't argue with that. That is unfair.
It's it you know, it,
Uh,
the book itself, it was so well written. I can't believe you were, like, 19 years old when you're writing this stuff because it really like, as far as a literary piece of work, it was really
mhm.
good.
Well,
I mean,
thank you.
I was
I
impressed.
appreciate that.
Trust me, I read a lot of books as a kid, mostly, like, G.A. Henty and other, cult approved or fundamental Christian approved,
Well, compared to
pieces
that
of
stuff,
literature.
it what probably was pretty exciting reading.
I mean, that thing
Yeah.
read like a graphic novel for me. It was incredible.
Oh,
Um,
man. Well, it's well, we haven't even gotten into the part where I begin to think differently about it, but
yeah.
years later, years later, when I went back to read it with fresh eyes, um, I just realized all the sort of, literary tricks that I used along the way to make it engaging or convincing, and, the right amount of sprinkling in Bible to say, "Oh, well, this is what the Bible teaches," and then, taking a verse out of context and applying it over here. And so the overall effect, if for someone who, is really wanting to obey the Lord and obey their parents and do the right thing, is this sense of like, "Oh, this really is what I have to do. This really is what I need to do." And it takes a lot of, like, discernment and going like, "Wait a minute, this doesn't add up," or "What's that based on?" Or, like, that little story, that little vignette you told, that might have an emotional impact, but is there anything else to back it up? And,
Yeah.
so that wasn't there, but, unfortunately, that is what I think a lot of, Christian literature can be like in that genre.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Even, like Frank Peretti, he's one of the Christian authors that I read a lot of
Oh, for sure, he was
before my family
huge.
was in the cult. I wanna specify that. My parents were not so sinful that they thought it was okay for me to be reading that trash after we got into the cult, but beforehand, I read those demon and angel fight books, and
Oh my
man, they
gosh,
were good.
man,
God, they
those
were
were
so good.
huge. Those were
Yeah.
so your family actually joined, like, the Gothard thing later?
I was like 12 or 13 when they
Oh,
joined. Yeah.
wow,
Yeah.
okay.
So,
That's kind of a brutal age to be forced into that.
it was actually perfect timing for me, because the hormones hadn't started kicking in yet. I was a little bit of a
Okay,
late bloomer. I don't really like admitting that, but I was I didn't start experiencing some of those
yeah,
thoughts and ideas until I was like 14 years
okay.
old. So 12 was like the perfect time
So it
for
didn't feel
me.
so oppressive at that point.
It didn't, and I was homeschooled, all the way through high school. I
Yeah, me too.
never attended a public school. So for me, it was just kind of like, oh, we're we're just going a little bit more conservative now. There's certain music I'm not allowed to listen to anymore,
Yeah.
and I can't watch movies anymore unless they're black and white. Like Abbott and Costello is what I grew up on, which is just so embarrassing. Like I thought Who's on Third was the most hilarious thing of all time.
I mean, it is a classic.
It's a classic, but in the late 90s, early 2000s, trying to relate to after I got out of the cult and trying to relate to anyone was just impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, I really did get by on my looks for
I
a
was
long time,
sneaking,
Josh.
well, there you go. That you gotta ride that, man. I was sneaking, Eddie Murphy's, Eddie Murphy's
Delirious?
yeah. What was Delirious? Was that the big one that back in the early '90s? It
Uh-huh.
would have been Delirious. Was that the red was he wearing
Oh, wait, no, I don't know if that was Delirious because you're talking about the red leather outfit, right?
the red leather outfit? I had a cassette tape of that Eddie Murphy. Yeah, that was great.
Nice. And
Yeah.
I mean, he says a lot of crazy stuff
Oh
in this,
my
but
gosh.
that was
I
ooh.
was learning stuff there that I'd never heard about.
I'll tell you
So,
what, I mean, cancel culture, if they'd gotten a hold of Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy and Sam
God,
Kinison back then, oh my god. You wanna talk about some problematic stuff, but
seriously.
hilarious.
Yeah,
Um,
seriously.
but anyways, one of the things I was curious about, being a Christian celebrity, because that's absolutely what you were.
Mm.
I mean, were moms just, like, throwing their daughters at you after this book came out?
Um, I mean, I did have some interesting experiences. One of the things that happened that kind of protected me a little bit from that is that I moved across the country and joined this church to be like a youth intern there. And so I stopped like touring and going and doing the conferences that I was doing in the same way. So when the book blew up, it I wasn't like on the road and so on. So I had a little bit of a sense of protection in that way, but the one thing I do remember was this I got this letter in the mail and I open it and there's this picture of this girl, beautiful girl, and it was this dad saying, "Hey, I would like to put my daughter forward for you to consider as a wife." And I was like, "Whoa, this is wild." Yeah. But that
That's
didn't happen.
awesome.
That wasn't happening all the time. That was a one-time occurrence.
I don't believe that at all.
Yeah.
I don't believe it because I know my mom would have offered up my sister given the opportunity. Like, if you had come to our church and and spoken, I mean,
Oh,
it would have been a free for all,
yeah, it's
with the
crazy.
ladies that went to
That
my church and their daughters.
that is the thing that I laugh about now. I'm about to turn 49, so I'm an old guy, gray in the beard, and, I do think though that it's like every generation, the church loves, like, young people that it can platform, that can be like, "Here they are. The new generation believes this," and there's a ton of energy behind it, and, it's kinda like there's always a new, boy band that's gonna pop up, right?
Sure.
Like, it just has to happen, so
Well, I mean, I think that happens in, a lot of different segments of our culture, right? Like Greta Thunberg. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah, that's
everyone
true.
just loved her and latched onto what she had to say because
Yeah,
it's the voice of a new generation, and
right.
that's really what you were. You were the voice of a new generation of evangelical Christians.
Mhm.
And it
Yeah.
was a message that resonated. And yeah, I mean, I can't imagine if you had kept doing like a speaker circuit. I mean, do you ever look back and just think, man, I should have just ridden that wave instead of becoming a pastor or whatever?
Oh my goodness. Oh, I have all kinds of things that, I would do differently in hindsight, but yeah. But I
Well, that
but
that kinda takes us to what happened after the fact,
yeah.
right? Because so you went and you became this youth intern, and you ultimately became a pastor of
Yeah,
a
that's
church. Was
right.
it the same church that you interned at?
Exactly, yeah. I was
Wow,
there for 17 years.
17 years.
Mhm, mhm.
Now, when the first book blew up, you were not dating the girl that you wrote about in Boy Meets Girl.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I met she's now my ex-wife, a
Mhm,
wonderful mother of my amazing kiddos. Her name is Shannon.
mhm.
Um, she actually has just written a book that is, her story of getting pulled into the church and all of that craziness from a woman's perspective.
Yeah.
So it's called The Woman They Wanted. Little plug for Shannon's book. Um, but we met, like, really early on. So she was working at the church. In fact, there's a crazy story. Like, when I got the first box of I Kissed Dating Goodbye and opened it, she was standing there because she worked at the church, and so I signed the first copy and gave it to her.
Oh, what a
So
power move, dude.
that's crazy.
Wow.
That's
That
crazy.
is
Had I
so
had
alpha.
There was no,
Woo.
that we were just friends at that point. So yeah, I but very quickly, about a year or so later, we started a relationship and then ended up getting married really quickly, which is what the other thing you have to do, is to get married quickly.
Well, yeah, because you can't
So,
burn in your passion,
you
right?
can't burn in your passion,
Yeah,
and
there's
there
a
was a lot
verse
of,
or something.
it's funny because there was a lot of, like, the guy who was my mentor, at this church, he was managing me in many ways. And I think there was a lot of fear around, we got to protect Josh because he's got this national platform and we want him to be the next pastor of this church. And he's written this book that, is reaching all these people. So we can't have him fuck up, literally. You know what I mean? Like, we cannot, we
This is the
cannot.
golden boy. Do not
Yeah.
let his golden penis touch anything
That's
until it is
right.
appropriate.
This is like, yeah, there was a very concerted cock blocking effort that was taking place. And I mean, I again, I believed all this stuff with all my heart. So I didn't want to do the wrong thing either. I wanted to follow all these guidelines. So yeah,
Sure.
I didn't kiss my wife until the wedding day.
Are
And
you
so
serious?
yeah, we followed all of that stuff, and which created its own set of problems, which she documents in her book.
Oh, I'm sure I
Uh,
can't, like,
but
sexual
that's the thing.
compatibility is such an important thing.
Oh my gosh, it's massive. So, um, I'll, part of what took place, if you wanna get into the part of the story where the wheels start to fall off.
Yeah.
um, First of all, it took a long time for me to, question the ideas in the book. I wrote a follow-up book. I it became a huge part of my identity. This was like, I was successful, right? Like, I had done something great and God had called me to do it, So there are all these levels of, why this ran so deep for me. Wrote another book about lust, like, all again, just like, be pure. Even when you're married, you need to be pure, and all those kinds of ideas. And pastored in this church for, ultimately, 17 years. But things started to the church went through turmoil. The church went through a massive split. There were very public issues that took place. My mentor and I had a falling out. Like, all these things started to go wrong. And in the midst of all that, another thing was, there were sex abuse that was not reported rightly in the church. And so there was just all these issues taking place. And I began to realize, like, oh man, like, there is something wrong here. I'm a part of
Mhm.
something wrong. I've been thinking wrong. Like, it was a slow process for me to actually start listening to people. And at the end of all that, I ended up stepping down from the church to take a sabbatical. I went to seminary for the first time. So I'd never gone through any sort of formal education.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, actually, when you hear the whole story, you're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Um, but it was in that context where suddenly I wasn't having to be the leader who was defending all the priorities of the organization. I wasn't having to be the teacher. I was just a student, and I was a student alongside these people who had been impacted by my book. And so they started telling me their stories, and I started going, "Oh man, like, there's something really wrong here." And that led to this whole very public process of doing interviews with people. And my final project for my school was actually doing a documentary that was capturing me going on this journey of interacting with people who had been hurt by my book. And I wanted to, the truth is, I didn't know where this was all gonna end. There's part of me that wanted to hold on to it and just say, like, "Hey, this was applied wrong, people took this too far. I didn't mean this." and so on. But I think part of what happened during that time is I began to realize, oh man, like I'm seeing these problems mirrored in my own marriage. I see these deficiencies. We were pushed into things. We didn't really get to know each other because of the ideas in this book and all those types of things. And I reached this point where I was like, I can't just, do some half-ass apology. I really need to disavow this book. Ended up apologizing for the book. My publisher pulled the book, which was amazing. I'm so grateful for them being willing to do that. Unpublished those books, and then, later my own marriage, dissolved, and all kinds of things took place. But it was a long process of being able to of finally coming to the realization of like, I can't stand by this being out there with
Right.
my approval, because it's built on a really faulty foundation.
Which is just an incredible dichotomy from what we've seen in the shiny happy people cult, where
Mm,
they stick to their guns, they stand firm in these principles that they know have hurt thousands, maybe even millions of people. And I
mm,
think the important thing for folks that are listening to this to understand is this was your livelihood.
mm.
The whole concept of courtship and purity culture, that is what you built your life on, professionally speaking.
Yeah.
And to give that up is huge, dude. I I mean, I can't imagine what that decision-making process must have been like.
Well, it gives me sympathy for, like, the people that you're describing who won't acknowledge what's so obvious, because when your whole community is built around something, your financial security is built around something, you're just inclined to be blind to it.
Yeah,
Like, you
yeah.
have a lot of reasons not to see it.
Uh-huh.
And, I mean, we see that in the political system, we see that in business, we see that all over the place. People are like, they won't admit things because they have a vested interest. And I think for me, I mean, I don't wanna act like I, am more courageous than the next person. I think I kind of experienced this perfect storm where so many things had fallen apart that I kind of, hit the pavement and was more honest with myself, because so much had kind of been shattered. The way the church had turned out, the way I disappointed myself, and I felt like I'd failed in different ways. I was sort of at this place of being ready to be honest. Um, but it was scary for sure. I mean, like, I mean, props to my ex-wife. Like, I remember the conversation where I was like, "I think I need to discontinue the book." And it was this conversation of like, "Are we gonna be able to make it? Like, are we gonna be able to pay for our kids' school?" Or, whatever, just those kind of conversations. It was a scary moment, but, I'm really grateful that we made that decision for sure.
That's so cool, man. And it sounds like you and your ex-wife are still on good terms.
Yeah, we've got a great co-parenting relationship, and, I'm really grateful for that. So,
That's awesome, man. I mean, that's really good to hear. One of the things that you mentioned that I think is so important to acknowledge is the culture of abuse
mm,
that these types of fundamental evangelical, whatever you want to call it, religious ideologies can create.
mhm,
Because you mentioned there was some abuse that was not correctly reported in your
right.
church, and I
Yeah.
watched the exact same thing happen in the church that my family was a part of,
Wow. Yeah.
before we moved from Texas to New England, and I went to the behavioral rehab at the cult compound in Indianapolis. The girl that I got in trouble for having a relationship with, ultimately, along with a couple of the other girls in our congregation, were abused by one of the pastors.
Oh my gosh.
Um, so, and this was not a fundamental Christian church. This wasn't like a shiny, happy people cult endorsed church. They were a fairly progressive church.
Mm,
Um, but you see these pastors with absolute power
mhm.
that can get away with this stuff because no one's going to call them out because they don't want to potentially question God's will.
Yeah.
And that's what you see happen time and time and time again in these types of environments. And it's so heartbreaking to watch.
You're totally right. I mean, I think wherever you have that much power concentrated, you're gonna see abuse. And I think the other thing that takes place too is that there's so much distrust of other forms of authority, like so much distrust of the government or child services and so on. You know, from the homeschool community that I grew up in, like there was always this fear of, the child protective services are going to come and take your kids away, that kind of mindset. So when something goes wrong or, there's abuse, you need to get the police involved. You need to report that, right? But when you have the mindset that the government is out to get you, the police are out to get you, they just wanna take your kids away, well, you're not gonna share that, and I think that's something that influenced our church. There was this mindset of, "Well, we can handle this internally," and then, like, way too high of a esteem for pastors, as if we had all this experience and knowledge and wisdom in every area, and we just didn't. We didn't know how to handle abuse situations. We didn't know how to care for victims, um, and so instead of getting the help that was needed, trying to, again, just handle things internally, and yeah, people were definitely hurt by that.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because these families, these especially homeschool Christian families, that didn't trust the government, that didn't trust CPS. Church was supposed to be the safe space,
Right.
right? And then it became exactly not that.
Mhm.
But even within the families, and this was probably a little bit unique to my situation. Well, not my particular situation because I didn't really experience this at home. I just know a lot of people that grew up in this
Mhm.
shiny, happy people cult with me, is this idea of patriarchy, right? And the
Mhm.
father is the absolute authority, and
Definitely.
whatever he says is law.
Yeah.
And that created, this crazy, crazy system and pattern of abuse within families that was just, I mean,
Mhm.
devastating to see. My own experience of, still identifying as a Christian, but not trusting religious structures whatsoever, um, I think is pretty common. But you took it even a step further.
So that's where you're at? That's so
Yeah.
fascinating to me.
Yeah,
I love
I
that.
still would call myself a Christian. I mean, there's a lot of Christians that would vehemently disagree with me on that. Oh, no, 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 no. You're not a real one. You're just, you're backslidden or potentially an apostate. We're
Yeah,
not sure.
right.
But you say the F word on stage and you tell some pretty inappropriate jokes. So clearly don't love Jesus the way you're supposed to, is probably what a lot of people would say.
I respect that so much. I love that you are just like, "No, you don't get to decide that for me. I'm still a Christian, but I just don't buy into your version of it."
Yeah, and I really don't. I mean, I think the Bible is probably more so a lot of anecdotal stories,
Mm.
or analogies, as opposed to literal fact. So that's kind of where I land. But you're even beyond that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I it would be hard for me to say that I'm a Christian. And maybe those voices are too strong in my head that are like, because I judged the hell out of all these other people along the way, if they weren't orthodox enough, if they weren't kind of ticking all the boxes that I thought you had to tick. And so I don't tick any of those boxes anymore. And so it's for me, I think I wanted to just be free from the pressure to try to justify my life or defend myself, in that context. And so I've been pretty public of saying, listen, I don't believe in the same way anymore. I couldn't even call myself a Christian according to those old standards and so on. But I do just want to have an openness. I want to have an openness to being wrong. I want to have an openness to, um, if there is a God, to know know that God, and if it is the God of Christianity, wonderful. But I think I'm still working through a lot of the reaction to the things that were so unhealthy.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to I'm still searching for that kernel, but it's hard for me to get at it sometimes because there's just so many things that send me down a path of pretty serious distraction, I guess is how you could say it.
Well, it's crazy to me that all of this started with you going to seminary. That's kind of where the cracks started showing and everything kind of started
Uh,
falling apart, which just goes to show that the Christian homeschoolers were right. You cannot go to college or it could just
I
destroy
sh
your faith. These
I should have gone to
worldly secular humanists,
I should have gone to homeschool seminary for
you
sure.
you should have gone to Verity College. That probably, probably been a
What
much
what
different
is
position
that?
now.
What is which college?
Dude, that was the Shiny Happy People cult's distance learning collegiate program. So basically
Oh,
it was a
wow.
campus. It was another one of their compounds that you could go to
Oh my
and
gosh.
study for the CLEP and Dante's test. They weren't an accredited school themselves. I think they went through like Charter Oak State College to ultimately grant the degrees. But
Oh,
Verity
wow.
was basically just another compound for college age kids to go to and study together, I suppose.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. That whole thing. And Bill Gothard, he's still out there, dude.
I
Still
can't
writing.
believe is he really?
Yes.
Oh my
And
goodness.
still maintains in his own words, and I quote, I have never kissed a girl. Uses the word
Oh,
girl. Doesn't say never kissed a woman. Bro, you're like 90 years old and you're still
dang.
saying I've never kissed a girl.
That makes it so much creepier for him to say that for some reason. Like, I just that's like
Yes.
a whole new level of creepy.
Dude, like why is that your
Why is that your defense?
intentional verbiage?
Yeah.
What? It's so weird, dude.
Oh my gosh, that's so crazy. I'm really curious, like, what's your relationship like with your family? Like, how do they feel about Bill Gothard now? How do they feel about what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a great relationship with my parents because we just choose not to discuss religion at all because they're still very, I would say, pretty fundamental Christian. I mean, the women in my family wear pants now, which is a huge step. That's a big deal for us. My little brother and my little sister, they both dated. They did not go the courtship route.
So
So
did your parents loosen up later? Did they leave Gothard and loosen up?
yeah, so I left the cult when I was 18.
Okay.
I went to the compound in Indianapolis at 16, came back, had already decided like I'm done with this. Like
Yeah.
no way. But was still underage. I didn't want to emancipate and, damage my family more than I already had. So I just stuck it out for another year and a half or so. And then
Yeah.
I left the cult and then they left about a year, maybe two after that, but still
Okay.
stayed very entrenched in, I would call it fundamental Christian ideology. They
Yeah.
became reformed
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Baptists. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I still have an issue with that as well. But, just to maintain a good relationship with my family and enjoy the time that I do spend with them, it's just like, hey, let's just not talk about religion because you're not going to like what I have to say. I promise you that. And it's just going to make everyone sad.
I mean, sometimes that's what you have to do to at least maintain a connection. So
Yeah.
that makes
But I
sense.
mean, my mom has apologized. I don't even know. I've told her like, you've got to stop apologizing. We all make mistakes. You were doing the best that you could with the information that you had. You thought
Right.
you were doing the right thing for your kids.
For
And we all
sure.
make mistakes.
Oh, I love that she's able to do that and that you're able to forgive. That's awesome. Did you know the Duggars? Like, or were they, like, super well known in the
I
circles when you
I
were
knew
around?
who they were.
Yeah.
I was not, associated with
Yeah.
them myself. I mean, we were in Texas for a lot of my formative years, so I actually
Okay.
knew Doug Phillips and
Oh,
his whole group, Little
yeah.
Bear Wheeler,
Of course.
the Go
Yes.
Forths. I was more familiar with that crew,
That crew, yeah.
which just became an absolute clusterfuck later on, as we all know, with Vision Forum and him having an inappropriate relationship with his underage nanny. I mean, dude, that whole thing was wild.
The nanny, man.
Yeah,
Man, the
yeah.
nanny. I just watched the Hillsong documentary, and there's a nanny in that story. Yeah.
Yeah. My co-host Bryce has actually talked to a few of the Hillsong folks.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, yeah, and, we haven't had them on the podcast yet, but would love to have a conversation with them just to kinda see where the parallels are with
Seriously.
because
Yeah.
that's not even remotely the kind of Christianity that you and I grew up with,
Oh, I know, totally different. Yeah.
which I mean, it just goes to show the issues that we experienced, the hypocrisy, if you wanna call it that,
Mhm.
disingenuous is how I refer to it.
Mhm.
That's not exclusive to fundamental Christianity, evangelical Christianity. It's across
Yeah.
all walks of faith, in my opinion, and even just all aspects of life to a
Yeah.
degree.
It's true.
You
It's
know.
true. Yeah.
So what are you up to now? What are you doing now that you've just distanced yourself from all of it, disavowed the book? You're
Yeah.
agnostic, I guess. I think that's the right way to say it.
Yeah, it was a big process for me of figuring out where my gifts and passions connected on a professional level. One of the things that I've seen, for a lot of pastors is that they can be really stuck because from a resume perspective, making a living, it's tough to translate what they've been doing in the church to the kind of general, world. Um, so I feel really grateful that my dad had set a real example of entrepreneurship when I was very young. So I kind of grew up around that. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm helping people with their message and helping them to figure out how to communicate what they're doing, how to so it's marketing,
That's awesome.
it's writing content for websites, it's social media content, it's a lot of strategy for people who are they're doing something really great, but for some reason they're not able to express it in a way that gets traction. And so I get to sit down with them and kind of dig into, okay, what's your story? What's the story of the person you want to connect with? How do those two intersect? How can we make this more clear and have a bigger impact? So I end up working on a lot of different industries and a lot of different projects, but it's at the heart of it is like the power of human connection.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things I did for a long time, now I look back and I realize, yeah, like when you're a pastor, you're literally
Mhm.
translating this ancient text and trying to make it accessible to, a big group of people. And I feel like I'm still doing that on the business front when it comes to marketing.
The text isn't quite so ancient, but it's just
Yeah,
helping it resonate, with a
exactly.
larger group of
Exactly.
people.
Exactly.
That's so cool, man, that you've been able to kinda shift like that, but,
Mm.
I mean, do people, like, clients or people that you work with, are they ever just like, "Are you that Josh Harris? Are you the dating guy?"
For the most part, it doesn't, that doesn't come up on a professional level. Every
No.
once in a while, I'll be doing a call with a client, and they'll be like, "By the way, I read your book." I'm like, "What?" I'm
"By
like,
the
"Are
way, you
you?"
ruined my life."
Yeah, exactly. Uh,
That's interesting, man. I mean, like I said, dude, I mean, you were a celebrity in the evangelical Christian community. So I mean, to me, it's like if anyone who mentioned the name Josh Harris to me, I'm just like, oh, I yeah, that's the guy. That's he's him. You know?
it's such a funny oh, man, such a funny thing to look back on. Like, what an era and how shaping it was for so many of us, and what I one of the most gratifying things is just coming across so many people who have lived through that. There's a lot of trauma, there can be a lot of heartache and regret and so on, but to see so many people thriving, whether they're still in the church or not, in all these different fields, um, using their talents and, so that's gratifying for me, even though, I have a lot of regret about the things I participated in and the ideas that I taught. It's like, there's life after all of that, life after all of that control. Yeah.
And yeah, our past does not define who we are today.
Mm.
Um, in as much as we let it, I
Yeah,
guess.
I agree.
Um,
I agree.
but that's I mean, it's just so cool to me, man, that, you know, I know you just kinda see it as a natural progression of decision making, and that's how it is in your mind. But for a guy like me, and a lot of people that I know who grew up with this stuff,
Mm,
admired your book, and then later realized this stuff did not help me at all.
mm,
To see the guy who authored the book, who we looked up to, admit none of this was right.
mm.
This did way more harm than good, and I am distancing myself and disavowing it. I mean, it's such an encouraging and I guess gratifying thing
Oh, I
that
appreciate that.
we had someone standing there next to us as we came to our own realization. So
Mm.
it's really cool, man. So I really do appreciate the stance that you took. How can people support you now, Josh?
Oh, man. Um, gosh, that's kind of a surprising question. I love to just connect with people, so, um, on Instagram, I'm pretty active. I love to hear from people. That's a great place to find me. And then I put out a little podcast where I kinda share my own journey and conversations like this one, so for people to listen along to the podcast would be fantastic.
That's awesome. What's the name of the podcast?
The podcast is, Clear and Loud with Josh Harris. So
Awesome.
that's the name of my company, Clear and Loud. So, yeah.
Awesome. And your Instagram, where do people find you there?
Yeah, it's just at Harris Josh. So Harris Josh.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Simple enough, man. Well, Josh, I really appreciate this. This has given me a lot of closure, because man, that book, it was so cool at first until it wasn't.
Oh, I'm
Until
glad I'm glad we could get closure, man.
yeah, this has been awesome. I know people are just absolutely gonna love hearing your story. So please, y'all, follow Josh on Instagram. Check out his podcast. Thank you again, Josh, so much for being here. And I hope we can connect again soon.
Really appreciate it, Davey. Thank you.